I'll never forget the moment I realized my own family was plotting to take everything from me. It wasn't some stranger in a suit. It wasn't a competitor trying to undercut my business. It was my blood, the people who were supposed to have my back for life. And the worst part? They didn't even flinch when they stabbed me in the back. They did it with smiles on their faces, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Let me take you back, because you need to understand just how deep this betrayal ran before you can really grasp why I did what I did. About a decade ago, I was just a guy in his early 20s with nothing but an idea and a fire in his chest. I poured every drop of energy into building a small tech startup. You know the kind of grind I'm talking about. The nights where you forget what sleep even feels like. The meals you skip because your bank account is empty. The sheer loneliness of working while the rest of the world is out enjoying life. That was me. I was living off instant noodles, barely keeping the lights on, all because I believed in what I was building. And somehow, through sheer stubbornness and obsession, I pulled it off. Year by year, brick by brick, I built something real. I hired a small team, signed some big contracts, and slowly the company went from being this fragile dream to something I could actually be proud of. Now, here's the thing about my family. Growing up, I always felt like I was in the shadows. My parents weren't bad people exactly, but they had this clear favorite. My younger sister, Sarah. She was the golden child. Everything she touched was praised, every achievement celebrated, like she'd just solved world hunger. Me? I could work myself to the bone, get top grades, and still be met with a lukewarm, "That's nice, honey." But when Sarah walked into a room, the whole family lit up like it was Christmas morning. And look, I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need the applause, that the work would speak for itself. But deep down, there was always this ache, this quiet voice asking, why aren't you ever enough for them? So, when Sarah graduated from this prestigious business school, a few years after I had already gotten my company off the ground, you can probably guess what happened. My parents couldn't stop bragging. Every phone call, every holiday dinner, it was Sarah this, Sarah that. And then they started planting the idea that she should join my company. At first I thought, why not? She's family, and maybe this would finally be a chance for us to work together, to build something side by side, instead of me always being the one grinding in the shadows. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the bridge that closed the gap between us. When she first came on board, it actually felt good. I won't lie to you. She had energy, ideas, and she knew how to talk. She could walk into a meeting and charm the socks off anyone. I thought, hey, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the missing piece. But here's where the storm clouds started rolling in. It didn't take long for Sarah to start making decisions without looping me in. Small things at first. Changing a presentation here, calling a client directly there. But then it grew. Suddenly, meetings were happening without me. My own employees were looking to her for guidance instead of me. And the worst part? She was good at it. Too good. She had that shine, that effortless confidence that made people want to follow her. Meanwhile, I was still the guy grinding in the background, making sure the engine didn't stall. I brushed it off, telling myself I was overreacting. But the cracks kept spreading. I'd walk into the office and see my team huddled around her, hanging on her every word. I'd pitch an idea only to have it dismissed, and then hear the same idea praised when Sarah rephrased it. It was like I was becoming invisible in my own company. I'd built with my blood and sweat. Have you ever felt that slow erosion of respect, where people stop seeing you as the leader and start treating you like an afterthought? It's like being ghosted in your own life. And then came the dinner. God, I can still see it. We were all sitting around the family table, me, my parents, Sarah, sharing what I thought would be a normal meal. My mom set down the roast chicken, my dad poured the wine, and then, with these glowing faces, they dropped the bomb. They announced, right there between bites of potatoes and gravy, that they wanted Sarah to take over the leadership of the company. My company. The one I had built from scratch, from nothing. They said it so casually, like it was some foregone conclusion, like it was the natural next step. My fork literally froze halfway to my mouth. I remember staring at them, thinking I must have misheard. But no, they looked me dead in the eye and said I should step aside, that Sarah was better suited to lead the company into the future. What do you even say in a moment like that? I tried to argue, tried to remind them whose sweat had paid for every brick of that business. But they just smiled, that pitying smile, the one that says, "We've already decided." Sarah didn't even protest. She just sat there, soaking in the praise, acting humble while her eyes sparkled with triumph. That was the moment the knife went in. That was the moment I realized my family wasn't just favoring Sarah anymore. They were actively cutting me out of my own life's work. And I'll be honest with you, I felt crushed, betrayed in a way that words barely capture. These weren't just colleagues turning on me. These were the people who raised me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Instead, they were telling me to hand over my dream to the sister they'd always worshipped. I barely got through that dinner without losing it. I remember going home, sitting in the dark and just staring at the walls. Have you ever had the ground ripped out from under you so completely that you can't even cry? You just sit there numb, trying to process how the people closest to you could gut you so casually. But here's the thing. That night, sitting in that silence, something hardened in me. It was like a switch flipped. If they thought they could just take everything from me, if they thought I was going to roll over and let Sarah waltz into my place, they had another thing coming. They didn't know me as well as they thought they did. Because while they saw me as the quiet, overlooked one, the guy grinding in the background, what they didn't see was the steel that grind had built in me. And in that moment, I decided I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fight them on their terms. No, I was going to play the long game. I was going to let them think they'd won, while I set the stage for the kind of revenge they'd never see coming. Now I've got to ask you, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have walked away quietly, or would you have started plotting like I did? Because trust me, this was only the beginning. After that dinner, something shifted in me. I couldn't look at my parents or my sister the same way again. Every interaction felt tainted, like there was this invisible film over everything we said and did. You ever have one of those moments where the world tilts a little and suddenly you realize things aren't what you thought they were? That was me. I went from believing I had a family that maybe didn't always understand me, but at least wanted the best for me, to realizing they were willing to strip me bare just to see their favorite shine. And back at the office, things only got worse. Sarah wasn't just helping out anymore. She was taking over. She'd stride into meetings like she owned the place, start outlining her vision for the future of the company, and people listened. They didn't just listen, they followed. And the thing that ate at me most wasn't even that she had good ideas. It was that she never gave me credit for the foundation I had already laid. She acted like the company had been floundering before she came in, like I was some placeholder until the real genius arrived. I wanted to scream and remind everyone that without me, there wouldn't even be a company to stand in. And my parents were relentless. every time I saw them, it was another round of subtle digs. You should really let Sarah handle the negotiations. She has such a gift for people. Or, don't you think Sarah's vision is a little more modern than yours? It was like death by 1,000 cuts. And Sarah, she played the role perfectly. Humble, sweet, acting like she wasn't asking for any of this attention while secretly thriving on every compliment, every nod of approval. I started noticing little shifts in my employees. People who used to come to me for decisions started bypassing me entirely. Projects would get rerouted through Sarah without me even knowing. One day I walked into a meeting, my own scheduled meeting, and found Sarah at the head of the table, running the show. My own employees barely looked surprised. Some didn't even notice I had walked in. Do you know what it feels like to be erased in your own house?
That's what it felt like. Like I was disappearing in real time, and nobody cared enough to stop it. I tried confronting Sarah once, just to see if she'd own up to what she was doing. I pulled her aside after work and said, "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but this is my company. You can't just step in and take over." And she looked at me with this infuriatingly calm expression, tilted her head and said, "I'm not taking over. I'm just doing what's best for the company. If people trust me, that's not my fault." Can you believe that? The audacity in her voice, like I should be thanking her for doing me a favor. It didn't stop there. My parents started showing up at the office more often, just to visit. But really, they were there to watch Sarah in action, to fawn over her like she was some kind of prodigy. I'd see them clapping her on the back, nodding approvingly while she pitched ideas. And every time I felt myself shrinking more and more. It's hard to admit this, but there were nights I came home, sat on my couch, and wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't cut out to lead anymore. Maybe I was just fooling myself. That's the kind of poison betrayal plants in your head. And the thing about poison, it spreads. Soon I couldn't eat without tasting bitterness, couldn't sleep without replaying conversations, trying to figure out how I'd gone from founder to outsider in the span of months. I stopped enjoying the work. I stopped enjoying anything. My whole life, I thought if I just worked hard enough, proved myself enough, I'd finally earn my family's respect. But here was the truth staring me in the face. No matter what I did, Sarah would always be the one they chose. That realization, it broke something in me. But it also freed me, because once you stop hoping for approval, once you finally accept that you'll never get it, you stop trying to please. And in that raw, painful emptiness, I found clarity. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their permission. And I sure as hell didn't need to sit by while they stole what I had built. But I couldn't just march in there and demand control back. That's what they expected me to do. Lash out, make a scene, prove them right about me being emotional and unfit to lead. No. If I was going to fight, it had to be on my terms. Quiet, strategic. The kind of fight where, by the time they realized what was happening, it would already be too late. Still, planning revenge isn't as glamorous as it sounds. It's not like you just snap your fingers and the universe hands you the perfect payback. No, it's slow, painful. There were days I doubted myself. Days I thought maybe I should just sell my shares, walk away, and start fresh somewhere else. But then I'd remember that dinner table. I'd remember my mother's proud smile when she announced Sarah would take over. I'd remember the smug gleam in Sarah's eyes. And every time, the fire came back. I started small, observing, taking note of who in the company was loyal to me and who had already drifted into Sarah's orbit. I paid close attention to our contracts, our assets, our clients. After all, this wasn't just the business to me. It was my life's work. And if I was going to lose it, I was damn sure going to decide how. At first, I thought about confronting my parents again, trying one last time to make them see reason. But every time I pictured it, I knew it would be useless. They had already made their minds. In their eyes, Sarah was the future, and I was just the stepping stone. That hurt more than anything, honestly. Not just losing the company, but realizing my own parents didn't believe in me. That's the kind of betrayal you carry in your bones. So I stopped trying to fight for their approval. Instead, I started fighting for myself. Quietly, patiently, methodically. Because if Sarah wanted to take my throne, she was going to find it empty. And she was going to learn the hard way that the crown she coveted came with nothing but ashes. Now let me ask you, how long would you have waited? Would you have fought back right away? Or would you have played the long game like I did, letting them think they had won? Be honest. I started building the plan like a careful architect, not a vengeful lunatic. That's important to understand. There was method to what I did, not just fury. Anger lit the match, but strategy kept the flame controlled. I knew the obvious route, storming into a boardroom, slamming my fist on the table, demanding my rights, would play right into their story about me being unstable, emotional, unfit to lead. If I acted overtly, my parents would smile, tell everyone I'd finally lost it, and Sarah would ride that narrative all the way to the bank. So I took the opposite approach. Invisible, slow, and irreversible. First, I reclaimed the one thing you can never truly fake: competence. I stopped trying to prove anything to my family and doubled down on the parts of the business only I knew. Those quiet technical systems, the messy legal agreements, the tangled web of client expectations and personal relationships that only years in the trenches taught you. I spent nights reading contracts, not to figure out loopholes to exploit, but to understand where the company's real value lived. I revisited old invoices, analyzed who had power and why, and rekindled the relationships I'd let cool because I'd always been too busy running the company to tend to them. I started with people, the core team members who had been with me through the bad months. I didn't invent loyalty. I reminded them why we were there together in the first place. I talked to them not as their CEO in front of a conference room, but as the person who had weathered the storms with them. I told stories about late nights debugging impossible issues, about the first big client who'd taken a chance on us, about the weird little rituals we'd created that made the company ours. That personal approach mattered. People remembered the small things. They remembered sacrifices. And slowly, one by one, they began to lean back toward me. I also started planting seeds with clients, but never the kind that smelled like manipulation. I invited a few of our key clients to informal lunches, not to badmouth Sarah, but to listen, really listen to their pain points and hopes. Most of our biggest contracts weren't written on paper alone. They were written in trust. A client didn't just buy a product, they bought the people they felt safe with. I reminded them of that safety. I told them what I saw as the honest path forward for their projects. It was subtle. I didn't say, if you leave, you'll be better off with me. I said, remember how we solved that nightmare last year? That was us, together. It was enough to make a few important voices hesitate before they endorsed Sarah's sweeping plans. But people are only half what makes a company tick. There were assets, digital infrastructure, proprietary processes, and a portfolio of side projects that weren't technically the core business, but carried real value. I began quietly preserving and documenting the intellectual property that I had developed, ensuring it lived in places under my control. I made backups and copies and redundancies that only someone obsessed and perhaps a little paranoid would think to create. Again, I wasn't stealing, I was safeguarding. I was protecting the part of the company that carried our essence. And I did something that felt almost childish at first. I started journaling the events as they happened, not to create a manifesto or a script, but because memory is a slippery thing and I needed a record of the dates, conversations, and small betrayals that had added up into this avalanche. Those pages became a map of where the company's emotional and financial compass had shifted, and they would become important later, not in a courtroom, but in conversations where clarity mattered. There were obstacles from the very beginning, and not all of them were external. The biggest one was the guilt that caught me off guard. This was my family we were talking about. My parents were not cartoon villains. They were complicated, loving people who made horrible choices. There were nights where the heat of my plan would give way to cold remorse. I'd look at my phone, look at my father's last text. "Hope you're doing well, son." And for a second, the story I'd been telling myself about pure betrayal blurred. Was I trying to take everything from them too? Was this all becoming petty at some point? Had I become the thing I hated? Those are dangerous questions, because revenge without a moral anchor becomes hollow. So I gave myself rules. No sabotage that could harm people physically. No public smear campaigns. No lines that would ruin lives beyond the professional sphere. I wanted justice that would feel inevitable and precise, not a messy explosion that left collateral damage. That moral boundary became my North Star, and it helped me keep the plan strategic rather than vindictive. There were close calls that made me sweat like a man caught with his hand in a cookie jar. Once, Sarah announced a surprise audit of all our partner contracts. Someone must have tipped her off that I'd been quietly reviewing our agreements. And for a full week, I was terrified she'd stumble on the copies I'd made. I constructed a harmless explanation in my head. I was consolidating files for the board. But nothing prepares you for the moment that your life's work could be exposed by a curious sibling who thinks she's doing the right thing. I stayed calm, I cleared my browser history, I moved sensitive files to places that weren't the obvious places, and I made sure that every interaction I had with the company systems looked innocuous. It was a huge relief when the audit came back clean, but the adrenaline of that week taught me that luck was a variable I could not rely on. Another near miss was when one of our top salespeople, someone close to Sarah, started sniffing around for grievances to tell her. I could see them mentally scripting a conversation to curry favor. I arranged to meet them for coffee, not to conspire, but to be honest. I didn't flatter or manipulate. I spoke plainly about how much this place had meant to me and how much we needed to keep the team intact, no matter what leadership looks like. That conversation didn't flip them instantly, but it planted doubt. Sometimes that's the best weapon. Tiny uncertainties in people you think are solid. I also had to play the long game with paperwork, which is about as romantic as it sounds, but it's where real empires live or die. I studied shareholder agreements, vesting schedules, employment contracts, and clauses that could be triggers. I consulted lawyers, but not to find illegal tricks. I wanted to ensure that everything I did would hold up if everyone asked questions. The goal was to make the transition I planned not only effective, but defensible. I wasn't interested in making headlines. I was interested in creating a new reality where the core of the company, the clients, the team, the culture, moved with me because that's where true value resides. And the emotional obstacles never stopped. My parents would call, bright and cheerful, wanting updates on Sarah's exciting new initiatives. Their tone pierced me. It was like salt in an old wound. There were evenings where I'd almost call them, almost tell them everything, almost ask them why they had done it. But I didn't. Instead, I let silence be its own answer. I allowed my actions to speak louder than any confrontation ever could. As I wove the plan, I built a new entity in parallel, lean and nimble. I didn't plaster the town with ads or hold a flashy launch party. Instead, I set up infrastructure that mirrored the services our clients relied on, hired a couple of trusted engineers on a consulting basis, and quietly positioned the new company as a continuation of the old, only with the people who actually got things done. The important detail here is that I didn't promise anything radical. I promised stability, dedication, and continuity. For clients who needed certainty more than buzzwords, that was gold. There were nights when fear crept in. Real fear. What if these moves were illegal? What if I misread a contract and stepped into a liability minefield? What if my parents, furious and humiliated, went to court and dragged my life out in a public spectacle? I slept badly for a while. The kind of bad sleep where you can taste defeat. But each morning I checked my rules and my documentation, and I kept moving forward with the kind of stubbornness that looks a lot like courage. The closer I got to taking action, the more I played to human economics rather than legal technicalities. People don't follow lawyers and clauses as much as they follow trust and predictability. So I crafted communications that felt honest, calls to clients about timelines, hands-on meetings where we recommitted to deliverables, personal check-ins with staff. When I finally put a few proposals on paper under the new company's name, it didn't feel like a hostile takeover. It felt like a hand extended to preserve a relationship. A few clients signed without fanfare. A couple of key engineers agreed to transition with me, citing the latent trust they'd cultivated with me over the years. Slowly, the backbone of the business migrated. But let me be clear, this wasn't theft. And I didn't want it to look like theft. It was a reassembly of value. If a client chose to work with the people who had helped them before, that was their prerogative. If employees chose to move to an environment they trusted, that was theirs too. What I did in essence was make the alternative, staying with Sarah and my parents, look riskier, less reliable. Risk aversion is a powerful thing in business, and I weaponized the perception of risk by being unquestionably steady. One of the most intense turns came when Sarah scheduled a public announcement, a glossy PR moment to cement her leadership. My stomach dropped when I saw the invite for investors and local press. If she made the move in public, it could harden narratives and make the migration of people and clients socially costly. I had to act before the soundbite, so I accelerated discreet conversations, quietly securing commitments that would make the transition feel natural and inevitable, not like a dramatic escape. That week felt like walking a knife's edge. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat much. Every ding of my phone made my heart lurch. There were smaller, human moments that could have derailed everything. An employee's partner got sick, and they needed flexibility. A supplier had billing confusion. I handled each of those with care, because the plan's success depended on trust in ordinary things. On being the person who answers the phone when someone panics at 2 a.m. That reliability builds reputational capital faster than any speech ever could. And then came the moment where everything either snapped into place or collapsed. I called a meeting with the 3 largest clients under the guise of a routine project alignment session. They came in, we reviewed milestones, and I listened like never before. After the meeting, I made an offer, a proposal that allowed them to continue receiving the work they relied on seamlessly, with the same people who had been doing the heavy lifting. I framed it as a continuity plan, not an attack. The 2 clients signed their intent that week. The third hesitated, worried about optics and reporting to their own board. I told them simply, "You won't be alone in this decision. We'll be here, and we'll carry you through." It was the last piece of the puzzle. When the time came to make a move public, I did it with simple professionalism. I resigned from the company. Not in a tantrum, not with threats, but in a clean, documented statement of intent. I disclosed that I was forming a new company, designed to preserve the client relationships and technical operations I valued, and I invited people to transition with me. I kept the language neutral and the tone respectful. It was important the move looked like a logical business decision, not a personal vendetta. That careful construction stripped the drama of its moral high ground and reframed it as a market choice. You might be wondering at this point whether I felt triumphant. Did I gloat? Not really. The rush wasn't about rubbing anyone's face in the dirt. It was the cold satisfaction of the plan working. There was relief, yes, and an odd, hollow victory that sat behind my ribs. The thing about revenge that's often misunderstood is that achieving it doesn't always fill the emptiness. Sometimes it just changes the shape of it. But before we get to the fallout, the meltdown that would flood the next chapter, ask yourself this. If you'd spent years building something with your hands and your mind, and watched the people who were supposed to be your allies try to hand it away, wouldn't you do whatever it takes to keep it honest? Would you wait, or would you act? Be honest. The day I resigned was strangely quiet. You'd expect fireworks, shouting, maybe tears, but instead it was almost clinical. I walked into the office, my letter already printed, tucked in a simple envelope. Sarah was at my desk, laughing with a couple of employees about some big investor call she had scheduled. The audacity of it burned, but I didn't flinch. I slid the envelope across the desk. She looked confused for a moment, then smirked like she thought she'd finally beaten me into submission. When she opened it, though, the smirk faded. She read the words slowly, her lips tightening, her face draining of color. My resignation wasn't just a goodbye. It was a statement of independence. I had declared that I was forming a new company, one already backed by key clients and core staff members. By the time she looked up, she knew what it meant. Her eyes darted to the names at the bottom of the document, to the list of projects that had already been reassigned under my new entity. She understood that I hadn't just walked away. I had walked away with the beating heart of the business. The news spread through the office like wildfire. Some employees looked shocked. Others smiled faintly, as if they had known this was coming. A few immediately packed their things, ready to follow me out the door. Sarah tried to keep her composure, but I could see her panic bubbling underneath. She muttered something about betrayal, about how I was stealing the company. But the truth was plain to
I wasn't stealing anything. I was simply taking with me the people and clients who trusted me more than they trusted her. And trust isn't something you can claim by decree. You earn it or you don't. That evening, my parents called me. The fury in their voices was like nothing I'd ever heard. My mother accused me of destroying the family legacy. My father said I was selfish, that I couldn't handle not being the center of attention. They demanded to know how I could do this to my sister, to them, after everything they had given me. I almost laughed. Given me? What they had given me was years of neglect, favoritism, and finally the knife in my back. I stayed calm on the call. I told them simply, this isn't your company. It never was. I built it, and I'm not letting you give it away. Then I hung up. The fallout was immediate. The next week, Sarah's big investor call collapsed when she couldn't deliver on projects that were already in motion under my new company. Clients stopped returning her calls, preferring to stick with the team they trusted, my team. The talented engineers and managers she thought would stay loyal to her had already signed on with me. Within a month, the old company was a hollow shell, its reputation gutted. Sarah scrambled to hire replacements. But you can't replace years of earned trust with a shiny degree and a pretty pitch. Investors pulled out, contracts dried up, and slowly, the company my family thought they could steal withered away in her hands. Meanwhile, my new venture flourished. It wasn't easy. We worked long hours, rebuilt systems, soothed nervous clients, but there was a sense of freedom in it. No more looking over my shoulder, no more begging for scraps of validation. Just me, my team, and the people who believed in what we were building. For the first time in years, I felt light. I felt whole. Word eventually got back to me about how bad things had gotten for Sarah. She tried spinning the story, of course, telling people I had sabotaged her, that I had betrayed the family. But those stories only carried weight for so long. The truth was obvious to anyone who had been paying attention. She had tried to take what wasn't hers, and she had been outmaneuvered. My parents stopped calling after a while. I think the shame was too much. Or maybe they just couldn't face the reality that their golden child had failed and their overlooked son had won. I won't lie to you, part of me relished it. The image of Sarah sitting at that desk, her face falling as she realized the empire she thought she'd inherited was slipping through her fingers. That memory still gives me a chill of satisfaction. But another part of me, the quieter part, felt sadness too. Because what I really wanted deep down wasn't revenge. It was respect. It was recognition. And I knew, even in victory, that I would probably never get that from my parents. That wound wouldn't heal just because I had beaten them at their own game. But maybe that's the point. Revenge doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't rewrite history. What it does, when done right, is restore balance. It reminds people that actions have consequences, that betrayal has a price. And for me, that was enough. Looking back now, I realized something else. The best revenge wasn't just watching Sarah fail. It was thriving without them. It was proving to myself, more than anyone, that I didn't need their approval to succeed, that my worth was never theirs to define. And that's the kind of closure no boardroom or dinner table declaration could ever give me. So, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have walked away quietly, let them crown Sarah, and watched everything you built slip through your fingers? Or would you have played the long game, waited patiently, and taken back what was yours in the most devastating way possible? Be honest. Could you have waited as long as I did for payback? Because in the end, my family's betrayal backfired spectacularly. They lost everything they thought they could control, and I gained something far more valuable than revenge.